All right, welcome to this episode of the, as of right now, Unnamed Podcast. Okay, so as I said in the last episode, if you did not listen to it, these next few, they're going to be like a little bit of a series. You're going to want to go back and listen to the last one if you haven't already, and you actually might even just want to skip the next few of these because I'm basically going to walk through my life story. Not completely. I am going to talk a little bit about this concept of realizing that, and again, you need the background of the last episode, but realizing that I have over the last 15, really like 20 years, put a lot of effort into being someone else, based on what I thought needed to be. And some of that is from a religious background. Now, I am a pastor, so by no means is this going to be some sort of like church hurt deconstruction type video or series. But yeah, a few things. So we'll get into some of it, and none of it is like, oh, I'm blaming this. Like okay, I'll just say up front, like yes, some of it is from some of the religious upbringing, especially just some of the religious tradition and expectation stuff. Not blaming any of that. Some of it is from like my dad's like his work ethic. My dad's a great guy, but he was kind of one of those to where it's like, and I've been this way for a lot of my life, and something I've had to work to get out of is like the way you see the world is reality, and anyone who doesn't kind of conform to that, there's something wrong with it. And being his son, it was his job to kind of teach me how things. So there's a little bit of that. Again, not blaming. Parents did a great job raising me. I'm super thankful for my parents. Love my parents. And then just, various different things. When I was younger, I'm just kind of doing like a top level, then we'll dive into this. I was bullied a lot when I was younger, which is weird because of how big I was, but I was still bullied quite a bit psychologically. I've always been a magnet for smaller kids who were insecure and thought that because I was big, I thought I was better than them. And, I didn't resume my workout. There we go. And so then they would then try to take it out on me by thinking they were smarter or emotionally trying to bully me or whatever. It was weird. Well, I'll get into some of that, but probably not too much because that's not really the whole point of what I'm talking about. And then I remember specifically, I just have a few times, that's what we're going to go through, where I've said this is who I am, and it's not good enough. I need to change to be more like this. And I've had several of them. The first one, we're going to go through some of these. So, and I feel like for this introduction to this episode, that has got me to a place where I've spent so much time and effort trying to be something else, which if you listen to the past episode, my hypothesis is essentially, that's what a lot of this stuff is with my mental health, is I have a hypothesis, and then I try to figure it out to see if I can prove it one way or another. And so it's like a mental health experiment. So with all that, I feel like that has caused me to be to shift and either spend an inordinate amount of time with my bipolar as either depressive or manic. And I've been trying to figure out for quite a while, 6 plus months, maybe closer to a year, why I'm hardly ever at base. And I will go base, and I'll only be that way for half a day or a day, maybe a day and a half. And then I go back and I can be depressive or manic for days, weeks, or even months at a time. And I don't understand why. And I think, so this is my hypothesis, is it's because of these external things that I've then turned into internal scripts, and I think they push me around. And when I was doing, again, I just kind of assume, I take for granted as if you just listen to all these episodes, so I'm not going to go into this too much, but I referenced a few episodes back, or I talked about and then referenced it in yesterday's episode, this idea of back when I left what I thought was going to be, I thought I was just walking away from ministry, essentially. I left youth ministry. I don't think I was actually walking away from ministry yet, but I left youth ministry, and I was going to try to figure out, I wanted to get into marketing, and we ended up in Clovis, California, right there with, next to Fresno, California. I had gone to school in Clovis for 1 year for like film school stuff. So I was familiar with the town. I liked the town. And I was basically trying to start a business. And I'd been a big fan for the last few years of Noah Kagan and AppSumo. And I basically just wanted to copy his exact same business model, but do it for churches. So I called it Church Loot and had a little, used Fiverr to get a little pirate logo designed. And the idea was if he got these deals that he then, sold at a discount, and I was going to do the same thing, but like for things like software and deals that like churches would want, and do training and that kind of stuff. So that never really took off, but there was a point there where we were living off of, I just left a church up in Oakhurst, California. We came down the hill, and I just gotten tax returns, and I had a month of severance, and so I didn't have to work for a while, and I was thinking this is going to be my seed money for my business. And for these like several months, I don't know, in my mind it's like 6 months, it may have been less, it may have been like 4. I had plenty of money because I'd gotten both a tax return and I'd had a month of severance. And I did when we first moved. I was working for about a month. So I'd had all this money that we were living off of. And I was going to start up a business. And the idea was, by the time that money ran out, I would have this business launched and I'd be making money. And I was like so happy. Like, this is the time that I've referenced where I was working, 12 plus hours a day, maybe 15 plus hours some days. And I had that crappy little office in the little closet in our bedroom. It was a nice apartment, but it wasn't huge. And I had this little closet office, and I had a metal fold-down chair, and I kind of jerry-rigged, whatever. I don't know, are those offensive? I think jerry-rig is. Jimmy-rigged? I don't think that's offensive, is it? I don't know. Anyway, sorry. And I was just working. I'd get up in the morning, and I'd work all day, and I'd have to force myself to take breaks and whatnot. I ended up getting like a Kindle, so that way, a Kindle Fire, and I started watching like a Spider-Man show with my daughter so I could take some breaks. I started watching Doctor Who because I just needed a way to take a break because I couldn't, I'd go for walks, I'd go swimming, because all I wanted to do was work all day long. And I'm pretty sure I was base for that entire, whatever it was, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. And I've talked to my wife about it, and she confirms that, yeah, I probably was. From her perspective, she agrees I probably was. So it was like, well, why? What was different? If I can't seem to stay base for more than, 12 to 24 hours, and I can go weeks or months without even getting to base, why was I base for so long? And the goal here is like, yeah, I'd want to be base because essentially when I'm base, that is, if manic and depressive are polar opposites, base is like my actual true personality. One, I think I'm the most productive and get the most amount of work done when I'm base. 2, I'm the best father and husband when I'm base, and so just really the best person. And 3, I'm the happiest. So how do I get and stay there? Or what causes me to not be there so much? And I've come to this conclusion that, again, mental health expert, but not a therapist or psychologist, I think it was the fact that this goal, this overriding goal to build this business was anchoring me at base. Because if I got too depressive, if I started to switch into depressive, the excitement of this next project and what the future was going to look like would pull me up. And if I got too manic, this need to keep focused and keep going would pull me back down. And it kept me, I think, pretty well at base because of that. But back to the idea of why do I struggle so much to stay at base? Why am I constantly either manic, I go long periods of manic, and then I'll spin out, crash out basically, and then, have a few weeks of depressive, and then go back to manic and only have these little short periods of being at base. And I think it's because of these external things. I have several times in my lifetime, not just subconsciously, so I think it's even more subconsciously, but I have consciously said, who I am is not good enough. Therefore, I must change that and be something else to actually matter. Now, this is not about like getting sympathy or poor me or that's terrible. This is just me, processing and working through this. So, like I said, I mentioned when I was younger, I was bullied quite a bit. And when I was younger, I was a super creative, super imaginative kid. Like I could spend all day in my room or in my backyard by myself. And I was this interesting kind of mix between could be just completely alone by myself, I almost as if I was an only child, even though I have two siblings, in my mind, I was basically like an only child in terms of not spoiled, but in terms of I could just entertain myself all day, all the time. And I would either be in my room playing with my Batman toys or out in the backyard playing either Batman or Power Rangers. Once I got a little older and Power Rangers came out. Oh, someone's here. All right. I think Doug got back from his county commissioner meeting. So, okay, we will. I don't want to take a quick pause to go talk to him real quick because I don't know if I'll remember to edit that. And I don't want it to be left in the episode. So we'll just keep going. And if he comes in, we'll just leave it all on camera or all in the episode. We share an office space. So with that, I could just play all the time. But then when I got around other kids, I wasn't like a loner. I would turn into this magnetic leader who would draw us together so we could then all play together. Now I preferred playing by myself, but I could definitely pull everyone in and organize, whether it was when we were really young and we'd play, Ninja Turtles, or when I was a little bit older, we'd play Power Rangers or whatever, we were superheroes, whatever. I could kind of pull everyone together and kind of almost be like the dungeon master of a D&D game, except I was also playing typically. But I would establish the rules, I'd be the referee, and I'd keep us on track. Because there'd always be that crazy kid who would be wanting to get it way off track, or there'd be that one kid who would just he would say, oh, I'm going to be Iceman. We'd play X-Men. And he'd be like, I'm going to be Iceman. And halfway through the fight, we're playing, right? And then he's like, oh, and then I use these earth powers to have a mountain come up and crush you. I'm like, whoa, hold on. You said you were Iceman. Yeah. You can't do that. Well, why not? Iceman has ice powers. You can't do that. And I would kind of referee and kind of play that role. But again, most happy just playing by myself. And I got to the point where I was writing and drawing my own comic books, and then I got a little bit older, and I wanted to have my own comic book company. And I was this kind of creative kid who could go off on my own, but then also would, when I was around people, drew everyone kind of together. I remember, I believe it was 6th grade. No, even before that. There's several times I can think of 3 strong times where I made a conscious decision to change who I was, to fit my environment better. The first one was I got jumped as a kid. We were living in Southern California, and this kid named Clay, I don't know his last name, nor would I say it, but his name was Clay, and he got a group of kids together. They lured me down into a cul-de-sac. And then I don't want to exaggerate. I was going to say 20 kids. That's probably an exaggeration. 8 or 9 kids, were hiding in bushes and came out and jumped me on this one kid's front lawn. Later on, they said their reason was Clay and this other kid were riding a bike, and they rode by me, and I reached out and I hit the back of their bicycle, which almost caused the kid to swerve and almost crash. He didn't crash. And that scared them. And that is what justified them to then get a group of kids together to lure me into this cul-de-sac and jump me. Well, as you can imagine, a kid who was already kind of insecure, and these kids who were these cool kids, I played with Clay, this other kid I didn't really know, for them to go out of their way to seek my validation on something. I don't remember what it was, but they were like, hey, come look at this. We want to know what you think. We're arguing about whatever. I'm like, cool. Someone values my opinion enough and then to turn out to be a trick, to be a trap, and then they jump me. I remember getting out of the dog pile and running home. I remember telling my mom, who I feel like none of the adults took it that seriously. Maybe because I am a big kid, so when I'm twice the size of these other kids, and they're like, you got beat up. First off, there's no damage on you because you're trying to say like 8 or 9 kids jumped you, but you look perfectly fine. I'm like, yeah, because I'm really tough, and I beat the crap out of them back. And like at one time, a kid tried to smash me in the head with a super soaker, and it broke his super soaker. And he wanted to complain that I broke a super soaker. I'm like, you hit me in the head with it. Just because it didn't knock me out like you were trying, instead it broke your gun, that's not my fault. So yeah, I was kind of like a Jack Reacher, except I was a sensitive kid. I wasn't the fighter, like I'm going to just tear you up. I could fight, and I had rage issues, probably because I was, picked on so much. It probably turned into these rage issues later on. No, I think I had them pretty young too. And so, like, I remember this sense of injustice of feeling like, I remember telling like my mom, and she went and talked to the other kid, and they had this little quaint little explanation of I made them nervous, and therefore somehow that justified it, and they were never in trouble. And I'm like, geez, nowadays these kids would be going to jail or something, right? Like, and somehow, I don't know, it just seemed very unfair. I remember going home and being super mad and thinking, I need to get so big and strong that no one could mess with me. And I remember my mom had just gotten home from the grocery store, and she'd bought a watermelon. And I remember picking up this watermelon and starting to basically, I didn't even know what it was called, but I started curling this watermelon. Like, I gotta get super strong, and I gotta be so strong that I'm like independent or self-reliant, because no one cares. Like, no one, right? Like, these kids jumped me, no one seemed to care. They never got in trouble. And I'm kind of compounding a few days, because immediately it was just get strong. But then it kind of led into this whole and that happened to me all the time, where because I was big, smaller kids would pick on me, and then the teachers or the parents never believed or never cared because I was the big kid. Therefore, it didn't really seem to matter, which always seemed unfair, because if it was the other way around, I'd be in trouble because I was big, right? So there's this injustice, right? I know I'm complaining about being, big and tall and strong. Like, that seems stupid. I'm just saying, that was the first time I remember thinking who I wasn't good enough and needed to change. And then, so that was whatever, 10 years old or something, right? And then I remember being in 6th grade, so junior high, and wanting the attention of girls, but being the kind of shy, quiet kid, kind of afraid to put himself out there. Mostly because when I was younger, when I did put myself out there, like I said, these other kids would use this opportunity to try to make fun of me. And, it caused me to kind of stay in a shell, right? So I remember being in 6th grade and seeing that there were these kids they were these skateboard kids who I thought were idiots, but they were getting all the attention because, and again, they weren't the brightest, they weren't the smartest tools in the shed, but, they were doing this stuff and they were being goofy, and the girls liked that. And I wanted the attention of the girls. So I remember making the conscious decision to change and be more outgoing. And learning that, hey, if I pay attention to certain things, I can pay attention, and I can learn, hey, if I say these kind of things and act this way, it gets this response. So I started kind of reverse engineering, essentially popularity, and what would get a response from people, and kind of, reverse engineering human psychology and behavior and how it worked, and thinking if I make myself more like this, it will get more attention, and started acting in certain ways, which that I think is probably pretty normal for a junior high boy to act in a way to get girls' attention. So that one probably wasn't super major. And then I remember my junior year, we took this personality test, and I answered it super truthfully. And again, being that kid who loved to read, loved to write, loved to draw, loved to, play with his own Batman toys by himself, I ended up getting, so then we took this test at junior year in my film school I was going to, and Well, half the class was in film school and half the class was in graphic designs. But this was class-wide. This was like, I think, through our psychology teacher. We had a psychology teacher, an English teacher, that we all did everything with them. And then half the class broke off to the film teacher, and then half the class broke off to the graphic design teacher. And so psychology was all of us. And so they break us off, and we sit at the table with everyone else based off the results. And I remember being like kind of embarrassed because I looked around and I was and again, I'm going to be kind of insensitive now because this was my thought process back then, not how I would actually feel now. But I remember like I was at the loser table because I answered truthfully, because, I was at the table with like the Pokemon and D&D kids. And I'd never really allowed myself, other than like I like comic books and stuff, to get too much into that. And I remember looking around going, no, I feel like I should be at that table with those kids. But I was at this table with these kids. And unfortunately, I continued to build that persona when I should have just like right then been like, yeah, these are my people. But no, I was like, nope, that's not, these aren't the successful ones. I got to go this way, which ironically, they're probably the ones, they're probably all millionaires now because they were the nerds. They all probably became like programmers and system admin guys and like early level behind the scenes startup founders. So they're probably actually very successful. But in high school, they weren't, the popular kids. And so I remember like, oh, I don't want to be at this table, like almost embarrassed. Because they were the kids that, I just happened to be. And I really think I fall into that nerd category. I just also happen to have very high levels of articulation, well, that's ironic, communication skills. Even though it took me 3 times to say the word, I've been much more articulate, even though I couldn't, articulate right there, and persuasive. But yet, I'm still at the core a nerd. I'm just, I'm like that stereotype of like, and I don't want to say this, I don't want to sound, this is hard because again, back to this is for me. So I'm going to say it, even though it sounds braggadocious and arrogant. But really, I probably fall into that king of the nerds, like persona, is probably who I fit in really well. But I didn't like that because I didn't want to be around the nerds because they weren't as socially, acceptable. Hold on, I need to grab something to drink. I am quite literally choking up here. Not in an emotional way, but I think I've been like really dehydrated. I've not been drinking enough water, and then I've been struggling with like literally choking up with a dry throat. Okay. So let's keep going. So I was like, nope, I got to change. I got to be more and more of the outgoing person. I found that if I had a camera, I could push the limits of even my own comfort zone. So being an introvert and really it's that whole ambivert thing. Like, I recharge as an introvert, but I can go out there and be, extroverted. And I'm literally a public speaker in terms of, being a pastor and whatnot, and content. But again, and I can dive into this more in other episodes, I'm still an introvert. But with the camera on me, I learned that I could really push the limits of the extroversion, right? And get out there. And I'd heard a quote about, I don't know if I heard this when I was younger. I know I did, because the day about the story I'm about to tell, I don't know. But, I heard it again years later from Casey Neistat, and it was modified. So he added his own version to this quote. He talked about how him and his brother were going to go, and I believe that they were going to go and confront their dad, or meet their dad who had kind of walked out on them, and it was scary. And he used the quote that basically that the camera will make you brave. And then he added onto it and said, and we had a lot of cameras. And I remember hearing that quote when I was younger, the camera will make you brave. And I remember realizing, yes, when I am holding a camera, I can do and say things that I normally would be too shy or embarrassed to do. And, 2 examples I can think of that is, and I had a friend who, he was the same way, but he learned that comedy for him was his version of the camera. or his muse really. The camera was my muse. Comedy and performance was his. And so really it was, how could we, being shy, embarrassed, scared introverts, how could we get the same power that the extroverts have, get the influence the extroverts have? And I could perform if I had a camera and get that power, and he could perform if it was comedy and get that power. And we would team up and do the most outrageous things. Like, I remember when the Spider-Man movie was the first one, Tobey Maguire, was going to be coming out in the theaters. Someone had offered him to let him borrow a Spider-Man costume if he would perform at this kid's birthday. And he had no interest in doing this kid's birthday. In fact, it was great anxiety for him. But he saw an opportunity that he would get this costume for the weekend to quote unquote practice and get used to for this kid's birthday party. So he tries it on, he throws clothes over it, very much to actually kind of look like in the newest, was it Spider-Man Far From Home or whatever, where the Tobey Maguire, they all kind of team up. And he kind of looked like that cool youth pastor, right? He runs over to my house. He goes, hey, come here. And he gets me in the bedroom and he goes, and he tells me, and he shows me, he pulls his shirt down. He's got the Spider-Man costume. He goes, they want me to do this birthday party. I don't want to. But if I do it, I'll get the costume for the weekend before the birthday party on Tuesday or whatever. He goes, do you want to go out this weekend? Do you have any ideas? Do you want to go out and shoot some stuff this weekend? If so, I'll say yes, so I get the costume. Because again, comedy was his way to get the power and be able to become a performer in the camera's mind. So he said, yeah, I'll grab the camera. We can go out and we can do some stuff. So he goes back, he agrees to do it. So we go out on Friday night, Saturday night. Didn't realize it was actually prom night, so we had no interest in going to prom. And we didn't even know it was prom night. So we go out and we're shooting these funny on the street videos where I take my camera, he dresses up Spider-Man, and we just go around, we start walking in public places, right? So the one I remember, we're at Taco Bell, there was some stuff there, but I remember we walked in a Hollywood video, and he goes into Spider-Man, and he was like, oh yeah, I want to rent the Spider-Man movie, and they're like, we don't have that. He's like, oh man, you don't? And they're like, no. He's like, well, when are you going to get it? They're like, well, since it comes out this weekend in the movie theater, probably a long time. And the guy was, not into it. And again, so he has the Spider-Man costume doing these comedy gags, and I had a camera. Therefore, two very shy guys who would normally be sitting at home playing video games or reading comic books were able to go out on prom weekend and do all these outrageous things, interact with people in the street, harass other, in a fun way. They enjoyed it. It made their prom night. People who were getting out of prom and going off to whatever, were running into these prom kids and interacting with them and joking with them, and a lot of them recognized me, and so they were like, hey Jared, and I was like, hey, and they're like, who is that under the mask? And I was like, oh, it's Peter Parker. And some of them were able to guess, is that Mark? And they could guess that it was Mark, under the mask, because we were friends and we did stunts like this. So it gave us, like I said, two shy introvert kids. It gave us the ability to get the power of the popular kids through performance, him using comedy to harness it, me using the camera. In fact, that was one story. I remember another one where I may be off track on this a little bit, but I'm going to tell these stories anyways because it's fun. And again, this podcast is therapy for me. So you can either get a benefit or entertainment from it, or you can obviously stop listening. So I remember another time I had my camera and we're out at My Dirt. And it was basically, my grandparents had this property in the outskirts of the outside of town of Chowchilla, California. And we called it My Dirt, but it was a slough. If you don't know what a slough is, it's basically, it's not exactly, but think of a giant, dried up riverbed that's all sand that, during certain times does have water. And we go out there my whole life and play and whatever. And I remember being out there one time because we're always looking for, once I got a car and a camera, man, we just drive everywhere. And, my grandpa, who I talked about in a past episode, they'd drive out places and they would dance to music. I would drive places and we'd look for locations for possible ideas, and we'd go back and write scripts. And sometimes we'd actually get some friends together and go out and actually shoot the scripts. And I have some stories of that I will probably indulge myself this week and tell a bunch of those stories as I'm kind of like resetting this podcast and kind of my brand and my content, and kind of trying to go down this self-discovery journey of resetting me and finding, who I am and how I can actually stay base a little bit longer. And yeah, so the second story I want to tell in this episode, and I'll wrap up this episode, is we're at the slough, and there was my grandpa had been renting out or leasing out part of it for this guy who had like a bee farm, basically, a bunch of beehives. Now, I don't have like a phobia of bees, but I'm a normal person who, I'm afraid of bees because they sting you. And really my only, grow up in Central California as basically in the heartland, not heartland, but farmland areas in Central California, my exposure with bees was typically I'm running around barefoot as a kid and I stepped on one and it stung me. That happened. B, I'm swimming and I get stung by a wasp or something like that. That happened. C, so I've been stung many times growing up. C, I'm at a church picnic and there's bees around coming after the food, and we're trying to swat them away without getting stung. Or D, another main experience was growing up again in Southern California, before Central California, being terrified that, we've been playing and we come back for our soda can, and trying to look in the can to see, and we didn't have cell phone lights, is there a bee in here that's going to sting me in my mouth if I take a drink of my soda? And so, right, those are the main things I think of when I think of bees. Now, granted, some of those I just told were wasp stories, but most of those were bee stories. So I'm now 14, 15. Well, no, I drive. So 16, 17. And I'm out at this property and we see these beehives, and normally I'd be like, nope, let's stay away from there. Lots of bees. But because I have a camera, I wanted to get a cool shot. And so I actually walked all the way. And this is probably 100 beehives. There's thousands of bees. And I walked, I have to try to find this footage. But I don't have it of me, obviously. I have POV. So I walk into the center of the beehive, turn around and walk out. Well, in the process of doing this, I'm getting covered in bees. And I know that bees are pretty much harmless unless they sense your fear. They're kind of like a dog, right? The best way to not get bit by a dog is to not be afraid of it, unless it's just a crazy dog or something, right? So I know as long as I can keep calm, these bees are probably not going to hurt me. Partway into this, and I'm covered in bees, I did have the thought that most beekeepers wear an actual suit, and I started to freak out, and I had to keep myself calm. And I walk, so I have this footage because I wanted the footage, and I got the bees are flying around. You can hear the hum, and you can even see bees flying over crawling over the lens. And again, I'm covered in bees, but I had a camera, and I could do anything because you're invincible when you have a camera. So that was definitely the start of that. I was able to then go out and do these fun things. And to be super honest, I got carried away with these stories. I was talking about being the scared, shy introvert kid, and that was a way to express myself. And I kind of got lost in some of those stories a little bit, but yes, I like what I came up with there about how both me and a friend who different, coming from different backgrounds, he had severe, crippling social anxiety and then very severe depression, and was on, medication, and I didn't know it, but then, I had bipolar, and we both were able to, both were, introverts who loved to sit in our rooms and draw and read comics, and he was a little more play video games, and I was a little more read comics. In fact, he played a lot of video games, and I didn't play that much, and he didn't read a ton of comics, and I read a ton. Again, we could find the power that the popular kids had through performance, him through comedy, me through content creation, basically, with camera. So I'm going to leave it on that, and I'm going to pick up in the next episode. So I started this talking about the idea of like making, like, several times trying to change like who I was. So the one when I was a kid and I was like, I'm not good enough. I just got jumped. I got to be so strong and independent that I don't need anyone and no one can hurt me. And then I was thinking more physically, but that kind of evolved emotionally over the years, because that was maybe the only time I was ever physically bullied. And again, I mean, you could argue that, like, man, did I win? Like, I got jumped by like 8 kids, and I came home and I was so physically damaged that, like, no one really believed me. That I was able to just hold my own and just kind of beat these other kids up back. That, like, people are like, yeah, but were you though? Were you really though? Like, does it count as being jumped if you just kind of like beat them all up back and you're not, like, you don't have, I wasn't bleeding at all. Didn't have a black eye, wasn't bleeding, didn't have a broken nose, no broken skin. I was out of breath and had messed up hair. Now, and a lot of that was because we're in the bottom of a dog pile. The time in 6th grade where I saw, hey, they're getting, the reaction I want. And then the time in high school, I was like, hey, I don't know if this is really the table I want to be at. And in high school, it actually got to the point where I actually came up with a persona where my middle name is Nathaniel. And so I would refer to myself as Nate, and I would use that persona much like many performers do, to harness, like, when I needed to do what needed to be done, which, we'll pick up there in the next episode. All right, love you guys, and hope this is helpful or at least entertaining. I'll see you in the next episode.